Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Black Health and Wealth Show. I'm your host, Kevin Boyette. Today, I'm here with Trey Roberts. Trey, I can't remember the name of your YouTube channel.
Kingdom Useful.
There it is. All right. So recently, Trey did a video on Kwame Brown, a special message to Kwame Brown. An emergency message, as a matter of fact, emergency message to Kwame Brown. And there were some things that I saw in your video that I wanted to discuss with you and talk to you about, and have been watching some of his other videos and things like that. So with that being said, you can, pick up with where you left off, which is, Kwame, has been doing these videos.
Yeah, I started to watch. The beef got me, really, to start off with. The beef between him and the all the smoke guys, former teammates of his, and
Steven Jackson, Matt Barnes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always thought just the way Stephen A. Smith, I mean, Stephen A. is, of course, bombastic, and dramatic in everything that he does, right? But like, it just always felt so disrespectful the way he would say Kwame's name. And, I graduated from college in 2000. I graduated from Historical Black College and University, Southern University here in New Orleans.
You went to Southern. I went to Howard.
Gotcha. And, I played basketball there for 4 years. I'm the only white kid in the history of the school to ever play there 4 years. That's the only record that I hold, points, assists, and rebounds. You won't find my name there. The white kids that play there 4 years, I'm number one. So, so I had just graduated from college, and I remember Kwame being the first high school kid to go number one overall. And I knew he wasn't the greatest player in the world, but like, the man stayed 12 years in the NBA. And I'm like, man, I'd like to be a $65 million plus 12-year NBA bust,
Right.
And I just started listening to him, and I'm like, wait a minute, this guy, he sounds different. And it wasn't that he sounded conservative, and he really didn't sound quote unquote liberal. And it just intrigued me to like listen to see some of the things that he was saying, and some of the things that he was saying, I was like, hey, this is kind of unique. In 2006, 2007, I pretty much knew that then candidate Obama was going to win the presidency. And I knew that like if I was gonna challenge any decisions that he was making, I was gonna have to overcome the accusation of I'm only opposing him because of race. And I was in my early 30s at that time, and I said I need to know why I believe certain policy decisions, certain ideologies, certain belief systems are either good for America or bad for America. But I realized at that time that I needed, just like I had kind of been formed in my college years by, I was inspired by like my first American history professor, Dr. James. I mean, he lit a fuse under me when he began to teach American history from an African-American perspective.
It's a different outlook, isn't it? It's totally different than anything in high school.
It was like getting all of the pieces of the puzzle that were missing, and everything just fell in place. So, and I just fell in love with history. I changed my major actually into social studies education so I could get back into the classroom and teach this, because I'm like, man, I just graduated from high school just a couple years ago, and this wasn't being taught. This would be great.
That's how I ended up in the classroom.
and I was like, this will be great for both white kids and black kids. I mean, people need to know, and Black history just began to resonate with me as a person, but more so that like what historically Black people have gone through in the United States of America, to me, there is no better American story. I mean, the story of promise and promises let down, the story of achievement and yet struggle, the overcoming and victories and setbacks, the whole nine. But America still keeps, being here available to make a more perfect union. So in the same sense, I knew that I needed to learn some things. And so I set out to find some additional Black teachers. I wanted to hear some Black voices, because here's what I didn't want. Kevin, I didn't want people to say, oh, you're just saying that because Sean Hannity said that, or you're just saying that because Rush Limbaugh said that. I'm like, no, no, no. Listen, where I got this from came from Dr. Thomas Sowell, Dr. Walter Williams, Larry Elder, Star Parker. Like, so now that we can push past that these are not white ideas, these ideas that I've learned come from Black people, can we get back to the topic at hand, which is whatever topic we're talking about? And that's just kind of been for me, you know, how I personally set out to learn things about politics, about economics, about our government, about history. It just resonates with me on a lot of levels.
Now, I will be honest with you. There were people who said to me, don't talk to Trey. You're not going to change his mind on anything. I said, I didn't set out to change Trey's mind. This is not, you know, brainwashing or anything like that. I set out to have a conversation with Trey, to get an understanding of Trey, to get an understanding of where Trey is coming from.
Because I was hopeful of that.
Because my firm belief is we're not going to progress anywhere until we start having real conversations. And the only way to have a conversation is one person listens, one person talks, or one group or whatever, and then the other one gets an opportunity to respond, acknowledge, whatever. But until we do that, we can't be dismissive of one another.
I agree.
Okay. And I think part of the problem is people want to dismiss stuff, just like you were saying, dismiss what you're saying, dismiss what your questions are, whatever, just because of the color of your skin.
Look, when you reached out to me, Kevin, I purposely did not go and watch a single video on your channel because I didn't want to I didn't want to come into this with any sort of preconceived notions. I said, look, somebody reached out to me. They want to have a conversation. I'm game for having a conversation. I have no ill will toward people. I'm a minister. I believe that all people are made in the likeness and image of God. I have a very humanity-driven, a very Dr. King content of character, you know, the universal brotherhood of mankind. And with that good faith, here I am. And, you know, I look forward to this conversation because I think we can be examples for people, for conversation that needs to be had, instead of having people yelling at each other, beefing with each other, you know, similar to what you just said. I totally agree with having these kind of conversations. And I'm not here to try to convince you of anything or sway you any way. I don't know what you believe, to be honest with you, about really anything.
Right.
Because I don't go, see, I guess maybe this is kind of a place to start. I know you as Kevin. Now, I don't know you as Kevin, some random Black guy. And even if I did think about you as Kevin, some random Black guy, what does that even mean? Because I don't see Black as some monolithic, one sort of way thing. Like, I already know, just from my personal experience of being at a Black college and university, there's a gamut, there's a richness, a diversity within, if you want to call it, the Black community. There isn't like singular monolithic thinking within the Black community. And to go into it with that assumption, to me, that's racist.
Right. Now, let's go back to the video, the Kwame Brown video, so we don't get too far off track. So
absolutely,
you know, because we can talk about Black colleges and all kinds of stuff, you know, for eons, and all the different things that are going on. But one of the things that you brought up was phonics and reading and writing and arithmetic. And one of the things that you brought up, another thing that you brought up that was that you didn't want this to become a black and white thing, what Kwame was saying, because he was saying some positive messages, and you didn't want this to become a black and white thing.
Correct.
And that makes sense, but I don't think that he has gone out to make it a black and white thing. I think that he's now, has he mentioned Black kids and Black problems and issues and things like that? Absolutely, but I don't think that he's made this a black white thing, or as some folks on some channels, you know, will do this, say, white folks, you can't do nothing for us. We don't need you. We don't want you. Go away, go do your own thing. We don't want to hear what you have to say. You have nothing to contribute to this conversation.
I don't know if you followed the video or not in the thread of chats and whatnot, but I had about a 30 comment thread with one particular commenter on the video that you're referring to. And that is basically how it ended. This person, in summary, basically said they were calling for segregation. They were making arguments for segregation. Black people have their stuff and do their thing and go their way and be completely separate from white people. This person, I don't know if it was a male or a female, but this person compared black and white to cats and dogs, different species. And I was like, do you realize you just, whether you intentionally meant to or not, you just dehumanized one of those two groups, either yourself or me. They compared, they said that they were better before civil rights, that black people were better before civil rights. And I'm like, really? Like you're literally saying that Jim Crow living is better than 2021 for black people in America today. And so like they were looking for a separatist. As the thing with Kwame, what I heard that made me say, hey, let's not make this in the most general sense a white black thing is that the white people that Kwame seems to be pointing out when he talks about the go along, get along gang, the white people who control, like the best, you couldn't have a better story than the one that broke just over the last couple of days with Rachel Nichols and Maria Taylor, right? Rachel Nichols has been doing the jump and doing stuff with the NBA for a while. In fact, Kwame says on one of his videos that he was her first NBA interview, right?
Have you read those? Have you read those? They're from the Washington Post from 2001, 2002, something like that.
Yeah, and they're not good. And I've never thought that Rachel Nichols was actually good at her job. But I also never took the time to like find out like how she got her job. Well, come to find out, she married Diane Sawyer's son.
Right.
Okay, so she's plugged in now, ABC, Disney, higher ups, and she's having a conversation with another white guy who's a higher up at ESPN, who also, by the way, is a big time advisor to LeBron James. Now, what's lost in all of this is that, and I've never had a chance to say this publicly, either on my radio show here locally on Saturdays, or on the internet or anything. But here's the thing: Rachel Nichols was 100%, in my opinion, she was 100% correct in saying the following: I've worked hard. I've experienced the difficulties of ESPN's lack of diversity from the female side. I feel like I've earned what I have right now. I don't want to let anybody take that. Here's what I've been saying for a long time. In this time that we live in of like critical race theory and living hysterically and through historical times or whatnot, like, hey, progressive white people, if you think that you're a racist, then step down and give your position to a black person.
Nobody's ever going to do that, though. Nobody who's ever been in power has ever. To me,
shows the hypocrisy
has
of
ever
the entire
woken up,
movement.
Right, has ever woken up and said, you know, I'm feeling real benevolent today, and I'm just going to step down, and y'all can have this. You know, I know I haven't been treating you well. I know I haven't been doing right by you, but I'm just going to step down now.
At any level, I mean, from like dog catcher, you know, like, listen. If Joe Biden really believes that he's so racist, okay, if he buys into this whole narrative of anti-racism as put out by the Ibram X. Kendis and the Robin DiAngelos and you know, Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and all these other people, if he really believes that, then think about this. President Biden, I'm going to challenge you through this YouTube video right here. Step down and give the presidency of the United States to the first black woman. Now watch, here's your legacy, Mr. Biden. First of all, I question your cognitive ability. You've lost, let's just say you've lost a step. It doesn't even feel good to like comment on that because it feels a little bit like elder abuse, okay? But you can be a part of the first black president in the Obama administration, and you can be an example to the country of stepping down and and assuading your guilt and giving the presidency over to Kamala Harris.
But see, the problem is there's no guilt. There's no guilt. There's
In
this
Biden
country
or in general?
in general, there's no guilt.
Well,
I can't speak.
I disagree with you.
And that's fine.
White guilt might be the most powerful force in the universe.
Well, I don't necessarily agree.
I'm talking stronger than gravity.
It ain't stronger than white supremacy. It ain't stronger than white supremacy. Sorry, nope.
Way stronger. Let me unpack how. White supremacy and white guilt are two sides of the same coin. See, if I'm a white supremacist, then I believe that simply because of the lack of melanin in my skin, somehow or another, makes me superior to those who have a greater percentage of melanin in their skin. So I deem myself as superior, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But we've pretty much as a society done a great job when the morons show up with swastikas and with their Confederate battle flags and stuff, like we see the clown show and they're pretty much marginalized. You can't point to a single white nationalist, neo-Nazi, uber right white supremacy group that has any monicum of power in our society anymore. Not compared to like pre-civil rights.
Okay, well, I kind of disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because pre-civil rights, folks had no problem with, riding through the streets with hoods on. People had no problems with lynching folks in the streets. That became unpopular. Okay, so instead of we're going to, scare folks with sheets, no, we'll go and you and your kids, y'all gonna go to law school. You're going to go run for public office. You're going to go run and work at the police department. You're going to go work in the schools. So what they've done is they've infiltrated all aspects of our lives. And you don't have to be loud about it to be effective. There's a quote that says, I
understand what you're saying.
There's a quote that says, real gangsters move in silence. Okay. And so.
But you could argue though, Kevin, correct? You could argue if they were already there in those institutions.
Not necessarily.
So when society changed and it became publicly unpopular for these different prejudices and the laws changed, right?
Right. So now we've got to find this. That's no different than a drug dealer on the street or a gun runner or anything like that. You cut down this channel, I got to figure a way to get my drugs into the United States. So I'm gonna dig a tunnel, I'm gonna drop them out of an airplane, I'm gonna have some mules, I'm gonna do whatever. So you're going to alter your approach, so to speak, but your mission is still the same.
That much I agree with you.
Okay.
Now, how do you see it? Where do you see when the civil rights, more or less, we're talking 64, 65, and 67, right? So this is all.
Let's just say 64 to 68.
Okay. So, but I'm still saying even before Malcolm and Martin are assassinated in 68. So like when those civil rights acts are passed, those things get passed percentage-wise with an overwhelming support of Republicans, and the greatest percentage of resistance to those acts are Democrats. So the Democrat Party hasn't fully transitioned yet by the end of the 60s into quote unquote where we see like 90+% of Black people voting for the Democrat candidate at any level.
Well,
right?
I will be the first to say this. One of the things that I believe that Blacks and whites do not realize, Hispanics, Asians, whatever, we're pawns in a bigger game. We are pawns in a much, much bigger game. You have Democrats and Republicans that outside of Congress, these guys go golfing, or these men and women go golfing. Their families vacation together, all that other good stuff. So we're actually pawns in a much bigger game.
I agree.
And you cannot just say, just because this person is Democratic, that they're for you. Just because this person is Republican, that they're against you. I live in a state right now that has a Republican governor. Okay. big time blue state, big time Democratic state. Okay. I live in a county, which is the richest county for Black Americans, in the United States. So, and that's primarily based on, the federal government being here. So you got great government jobs. Okay. It's not necessarily that way around the country. So as a result, people get sucked in. But this Republican governor, I actually voted for him in his second term. I'll be the first one to admit it. I voted for him. He was doing a good job. He hadn't screwed up anything. Let's keep it moving. Now, do I agree with everything that he does? Absolutely not.
Right.
I don't agree with everything that anyone does. Okay. Whether it's, the governor, my parents, my wife, my child, I don't agree with anything anyone does 100%. But I do believe that there are people, there are institutions, there are things that are in place that hamper the progression of Black folks.
I agree.
Okay. And so,
now, can you name some of those institutions?
Absolutely. Our federal government is one. And once again, like I said, we're pawns in the same game, because if you
how do you see the federal government? Can you name like a specific instance where the federal government, an example of where the federal government?
Well, let's talk about something that you talked about in your video.
Okay.
School choice.
All right.
I understand your points about school choice, that parents should have the ability to take their tax dollars and put them in here, over here, and my child can go. Well, if you take a child out of the inner city and take them out to the suburbs so they can go to school instead of going to their neighborhood local school, then now you're talking about a child that's having to get up earlier to travel. You're talking about a child that's getting home later than other kids that are in that neighborhood to get started on their homework. They may not have, like you talked about in your video, they may not have the resources at home to do the things that they need to do. But by the same token, the average age of a school in the United States is over 40 years. Okay. So
not since the baby boomer generation, really.
Right. So some of these buildings need to be torn down, rebuilt. You have money that goes into every school budget. Okay, from every city, every county, every state around the nation, not to mention the federal funds that come in. Why aren't you rebuilding these schools? Why aren't you, these inner city schools, why aren't you rebuilding them? And the problem that happens is a lot of times they don't get touched until white folks move into the neighborhood.
Right. When the cities get regentrified.
Right. Or as they call it right now, an opportunity zone.
Right.
Okay. That's it.
Okay. So now for full disclosure, you said you're a teacher?
I used to be a teacher.
Okay. Were you a union dues paying member?
No.
Okay. So my degree is in education. So I was a school teacher as well.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't teach anymore. I was never a member of the union either. Okay. So just throwing it out there for full disclosure. Yep. I know the situation that you just said, that may be the least ideal situation. Okay. Mm-hmm. But just to have the ability to, if your only option, here's my point, to have multiple options, one that includes some inconvenience, but a better education, to me is far better than
the education they're receiving.
Yeah, pure convenience and just an education system that fails you miserably.
Right, but I understand that, but I guess my point is, you've got all this money that's coming into the school system. Why aren't you, if you did one school a year, you know what I'm saying? We're gonna revamp this one school every year, whether it's an elementary school, a middle school, or a high school.
After Katrina, in 2005, Katrina was unique because all of the schools in New Orleans were basically destroyed. Very few of the buildings, and the school district went from a publicly run school district to New Orleans sort of became this petri dish of pedagogical experimentation, right? And what you saw was charters from companies all over the country coming in with their educational theory, and the state was handing out 3-year charters like candy, okay? And so what I did at the time, I was in financial services. The business was blowing and going. This was before the housing crisis. This was before the BP spill down here. and everything was good. And so what I did was I was just curious. I'm from New Orleans, and I'm like, I need to see what's so bad about New Orleans education. Like, why is it so bad? So I took a year and I went to every school in the district, from Head Start, pre-K threes, all the way to 12th grade charter high schools. Okay. Saw a lot of good things, saw a lot of bad things, saw a lot of sad things, saw a lot of things that made me hopeful for the future. But after 3 years, a lot of these charters, they didn't hit their benchmarks. They didn't get their school performance scores where they were
Right.
supposed to
They
be,
took their money and ran.
and they pieced out. Exactly. So who's left behind in the wake of all of that are the local students, right? And I'm seeing like 5 and 6 year olds getting up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to be put on a bus to then spend 2 hours going around the school, going around the city, picking up kids to get to school for 8, feed them breakfast. Their school doesn't start till 9:30. They've already been 4.5 hours away from their families, go to school all day, then go into aftercare to have the bus pick them up for 6, to again drive around and get home for like 8 o'clock, to then what? Go to bed and then get up and do it all over again. It broke my heart, because at the time I had my oldest was like around the same age. So I understand that the choice, a lot of times the choices available are not going to be there. My thing is that we see too many of our systems that are not doing the right thing. And here's the bigger thing. If we're talking inner city, what inner city are we talking about? Because I don't know too many inner cities across America today in 2021 that are run by white Republicans. Most of your school boards in inner cities are run by African Americans, fully Democrats. And here in New Orleans, our city council, our mayor, all of our elected officials, and for most of the cities, like in New Orleans, we haven't had a Republican mayor in the city of New Orleans since Reconstruction. And that mayor was appointed by the president of the United States. But that's not unusual for Baltimore, Newark, Chicago, Philly, East St. Louis, Philly, DC, Oakland. Yeah. I mean, like the places where we see the worst education being done to American children is in our inner cities. And we've got 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes longer than that, years of being run by progressive Democrats, and many of whom are African American themselves, in positions of power to make decisions and make change. So my whole thing is I'm never gonna get a full Republican school board here in the city of New Orleans to make some real Republican. And look, by the way, I'm not a Republican. Okay? I'm a registered libertarian. But I'm just saying, like in the dichotomy of which we live, I'm never gonna get the city of New Orleans to adopt a Republican council and get those. So I want to do something that can give parents who look at their child's education, who are fearful because they walk through metal detectors and they're being wanded and there's actual violence within the schools. Those are the situations that I want them to be able to, if they so choose. They don't have a means to do it, but they do if those tax dollars follow them. And I just feel like having choice is better than no choice and failure.
Now something that you brought up that's really ironic is you talked about metal detectors and things like that. And it's funny that you have these metal detectors and all this other stuff, but you don't have any mass school shootings in the inner cities.
Yeah, you don't have the Columbine
Right.
style. Yeah, correct.
Sandy Hook.
Correct.
You don't have any of that in the inner cities.
But you still have the drive-bys.
You don't have the drive-bys at schools. You'll have them in the neighborhoods. You'll have them in the neighborhood, but very seldom is anybody ever coming up, especially in the inner city, and walk. Now they'll bring their mama, their grandma, their cousins, and they'll bring everybody up there to fight you. Okay, right. They'll and you could be in kindergarten in a fight, and all these people are trucking down the street to come take up for this 5-year-old. That'll happen 7 days a week. Okay, right. But in terms of shootings and things like that, neighborhoods, you're absolutely correct. But on school grounds, usually is not happening. Typically, that's not the situation.
Let me circle back around to sort of before we jumped off onto, we were talking kind of about like institutions, and you brought up the school choice. the point that I was making is let me share with you where I see systemic racism. I see systemic racism in any institution that is run by liberal progressive whites. So that would include things like the media, things like academics and universities, the entertainment industry.
Do you think those
Those,
things are run by liberal progressive whites?
yeah.
Do you?
Who else is it run by?
I don't think that it's run by liberal progressive whites. I think that it's run by people that are determined to keep people poor. Black or white, it doesn't make a difference. They're determined to keep people poor. They're determined to keep you in your place. It's like the quote by Lyndon Johnson, where, he said, if I can give the poorest white man somebody to look down upon, I will, I won't have to pick his pockets. He'll give me his money.
And allegedly on his way to sign the 64 Civil Rights Act, he said, I'm going to go sign this act and I'll have these ends voting Democrat for the next 150 years.
Yeah, next 200 years. Right. And he has a bunch of quotes.
Right. And look, white progressive.
I don't think that he was progressive. I think that goes back to what you mentioned before, white guilt. Okay. I don't think that he was progressive. I think that if he could have had his druthers, he ain't passing no bill. Like we said, you're not giving up power.
No, listen, the 64 Act would have passed in the late 50s under Eisenhower if it had not been for Senator Johnson and Senator Kennedy, who filibustered the passing of it in the late 50s.
Right, 57. So 57. That's when he was like, I think we're going to have to pass this N-word bill. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the same person who signs it into law and gets all the credit for being this savior,
right,
is the same one that nobody talks about who filibustered the actual passing of it years earlier.
Exactly. And so that's what I'm saying, is that you're not doing this out of the kindness of your heart. You're not doing this because this is the right thing to do. You're doing this because either there's some benefit to you long term, some benefit to something that you're trying to accomplish, but it's not from a place of love. It's not. I love Black people and I think that all Black people should be treated equal and da da da. No, it's not coming from that.
Kevin, go back to my claim of liberal whites in positions of power running corporations, like for instance, the opposite would be that these are what? Conservative whites running these organizations?
No, like I said, I don't think that it's a liberal conservative thing. I think it's a rich poor thing.
I definitely agree with you that there is a lot with have and have not. I always say it's not black or white, it's green.
Well, I've always said that we've gone from upper, middle, and lower class to have and have nots. And there's one thing that I know about have nots is they have no problem taking from haves.
Okay.
Thus, now, I have an arsenal here at home. So,
all right. So I still contend that the elites who control the institutions that I mentioned, because I'm looking at institutional racism. Okay. That the elites that control those institutions, the universities, the media companies, what I'm saying is they align more if we're doing our kind of dichotomy of right, left, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. What I'm saying is like, for instance, in religious studies, in divinity schools and seminaries across America, there's a 70-to-1 ratio of professors of religious studies who registered with the Democrat Party versus the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. That there are certain anthropology and sociological areas of study that have no registered Republican. That shades how the world is filtered to those students and how information is taught.
Okay. Now,
right? So what I see is, as a conservative, I identify politically as a conservative. Mm-hmm. What I see not soft bigotry, but I see bigotry of low expectation. I see white people like Malcolm X warned Black people in the 1960s that the greatest enemy to black progress was the white liberal. Mm-hmm. Thomas Sowell later on talks about black rednecks and white liberals.
Mm-hmm.
So there you have two ends of kind of an ideological spectrum, and they're pointing to the same group. And that's what I was hoping to try to make a distinction to Kwame on, was like, hey, you're right to point out that there are certain white people that are in positions of power. And going back to the Rachel Nichols thing, she was all Black Lives Matter, BLM, let's wear the t-shirts, let's put the stuff on the court. I'm all for it. But when they come for her stuff, and
Shut it down.
she's a great example of a white liberal. She's definitely not a like a Republican conservative. She's gonna out front act and behave like she's concerned, right?
Okay.
But it's a
I have to
concern.
cut
This is
I have
this
to
is what I
cut you off.
said.
Okay. I have to cut
Okay,
you off real quick. I have
go
one
ahead.
quick question for you. Have you
Sure.
ever seen a movie called Space Traders?
I don't think I have.
Okay, I promise you I will send you the link to this. It's on
Okay.
YouTube. It was a show called Cosmic Slop that came out in the late 80s, like 88, that was done by George Clinton. And there's
Okay.
this episode called Space Traders.
Like Grand Funk?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like Parliament Funkadelic, George Clinton.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
He was the producer of this. And in this first episode, there's like 3 or 4 episodes of this show. And then it was so far ahead of its time that HBO took it off the air.
Okay.
In this first episode, it's called Space Traders. And the people that you're talking about are in this movie. So these aliens come down from outer space. And they come to the president and they tell the president of the United States, we're going to return the United States back to its former glory. You will be the richest country in the world. You will be the most powerful country in the world, all this other stuff. But in order for us to do that, we want everybody in your country with, I forgot what the percentage was, with this percent of melanin in their skin. And so you've got like the chief of, the president's cabinet having this discussion. You've got people in the streets having this discussions. They've got campaigns going on, but it's about 30 minutes. But it's 30 minutes to really make you kind of look at yourself, because you'll have, like you said, a Democratic president or a liberal president or conservative president, but hell, if I can return this country to its former glory, or I don't, taxpayers don't have to pay any taxes for a year, yeah, send them away. Forget about them being citizens, forget about humanity. Yeah, go and send them away. And so I say that to say, just because somebody is registered as a Democrat or labels themselves as a liberal, behind closed doors, we don't know what's in their head or what's in their heart. And so we talked about institutions, and when you were talking about Kwame and stuff, the NFL is a perfect example. The NFL is a perfect example because you've got a lot of these owners that are conservatives or registered Republicans. You have the players that are Black, and anytime they want to make change, based off of a situation. Now, this past year with the pandemic, the NFL took a lot softer stance than they had in the past. But when it came to issues of race, police brutality, those kinds of things, they took a much softer stance than they had before. But you had a president, previously that was like, if they kneel, kick them some bitches out the league. Whoa, dude. I mean, you're supposed to be able to peacefully protest. And my question has always been, what's the right way to peacefully protest? Because when people peacefully protest, there's always some group that gets up in arms about people peacefully protesting, whether they're just walking down the street or taking a knee. Somebody, like back in the 90s with Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, just praying. I'm praying during the national anthem. I'm not taking a seat. I'm not giving the national anthem my middle finger. I haven't mooned the flag. I haven't set the flag on fire. I'm praying. I am praying. I am praying for a better world. I'm praying for a better nation. I'm praying I hit 60 tonight, whatever. but I'm praying. I'm not uh what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not animated with it, like you talked about earlier. I'm not animated with it. I'm not yelling. I'm not screaming. I'm not throwing stuff. I'm not breaking stuff. And I, there are, like I said, I just think that there are institutions and people that are in place in these institutions. Maybe the institution as a whole might not be bad, but there are people in those institutions that are. It's like a police force.
Well, I think you're gonna have bad people.
Everywhere.
I think you're gonna have bad people.
I mean, you have them.
Right?
You have them in the church.
Sure, 100%.
You know what I'm saying? You have them in the church. You have them in the police force. There are bad people all over.
So, one of the things that I think, being the age that I am, like
How old are
44.
Okay, I'm 11 years older. I'm 55. Okay.
So the 1990s to me was just a great time. You've got some of the greatest comedy, some of the greatest movies, as it pertains to like race relationship. Like I was playing college basketball from 1996 to 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was ever a time when I'd walk into a gym that I wasn't called Billy Hoyle from White Man Can't Jump,
Yep.
Yeah, it's just a great time. I feel like as a Gen Xer, I feel like we looked at our parents and grandparents and we thought, wow, you thought less of people because of the color of their skin. That's like stupid. And we interracially dated. We interracially had friendships, relationships.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have the race riots on campus that I heard my dad talk about coming out of integration in the 60s and 70s. We didn't have that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to see the country being re-racialized right now, to see us going to no, you're not just going to ignore the color of my skin and treat me like a man or treat me like a woman and see me just in that identity. But now the color of my skin means something more than just a personal pride or a personal identification of who I am. That's the part that makes that's why I like what Kwame's doing, because it's that mama's cooking and it's that unity, doing the right thing because it's the right thing, seemingly without the agenda except to see people get help that need help.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm concerned about is I'm concerned that in the re-racialization of our country, to once again be told that skin color means something, that's a nation that you and I both don't want to live out the rest of our lives in. Because you have 60% of the population that for the most part has been trained really well. I would say the mass majority of the 60% of whites don't walk around all day long thinking about their white skin. Now, some people would call that privilege, but I think I see it as some of the successes of like the civil rights movement and policy decisions and heart changes and societal changes that took place coming out of the civil rights movement.
I think that might be a portion, but it's not the majority. And that's my belief. My belief is that it's not the majority and it's not the majority of institutions. Once again, like we started in the beginning, nobody is going to wake up and say, you know what, I'm giving up power today.
So let me just throw this number out there. I would say from my experience that 90+% of the 13% of Black people in America today think about often or relate to their skin color.
You don't have a choice.
But I would say that less than 10% of white people, of the 60% that make up white in America, think about their skin color.
And I think that if you were,
here's my warning, and because I think there's a danger coming.
No.
Because now what I hear is the color of my skin matters. And if a significant portion of that 60%, of which I'm never going to ascribe to, regardless of how popular it becomes, if a portion of that 60% begins to take on the same sort of importance of their skin color and start to argue for, to try to make policy for, to try and
redistrict,
to do things for, well, but listen, that's both parties. I live in a district that a white Republican could never get elected in, and it was gerrymandered for the Democrat candidate. I mean, look, it took a House of Representatives being under indictment for him to lose his seat in this particular district.
Well,
And he
like
did so.
I said, we're pawns in a bigger game.
Agreed. I guess my point, and I'm not doing a good enough job of making it, is just simply this: is that I don't want to live in a country if we move forward and you and I are pushed into, I'm no longer going to treat you as Kevin and you're going to treat me as Trey. Well, I'm going to treat you as Kevin, the black guy, and you're going to treat me as Trey, the white guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that America to come. And I fear that that's where we're being pushed as pawns. I feel like that's where you and I and people who look like you and I are being pushed. And that's not good for the country.
Well, I think part of that push is the whole fear mongering. So as long as I have you scared of me and me scared of you, or what you might do to me or what I might do to you, then that's always going to be a problem. I have a good friend, and I remember, I'll never forget him telling me this story. He's from Utah, right? And a white guy, went to school in North Carolina, went to college in North Carolina. But before he left home, everybody told him about beware of the big black man. Beware of the big black man, okay? So he's like, I'm leaving the library one night, I'm going back to my dorm. He's like, it's dark. He's like, it's dark outside. And all I see is this black guy approaching me, who's about 6'4", 250. And all I can hear in the back of my head is, beware of the big black man, beware of the big black man, beware of the big black man. He's like, and as the guy gets closer to me, the guy, reaches out and he speaks, and he's like, excuse me, can I ask you a question? And he's like, I'm all scared and nervous, like, what do you want? Is he here to rob me? Is he here to hurt me? What's going on? And the dude said, do you know Jesus? And if you don't know Jesus, I'd like to help you to get to know Jesus. That, and I understand what you're saying. That's not the country that we want to go to, but I believe that's a country that we're headed towards.
Okay, well, let me give you a different example of that, the other side of the coin to that. Kevin, how many unarmed black men were killed by police officers in 2020?
I don't have the exact number.
I'll give it to you.
But I know it's about equal to whites.
I'll give it to you, 18.
Mm-hmm.
Out of 300 million police interactions, 18 unarmed black men, or black people rather, were killed by police officers.
Mm-hmm.
22 white people were killed in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Neither number should cause either you nor me to shiver when we see police officers. But you know what we don't, but you know what? If we watch the news every night for the course of the same year, and I've said this on my radio show, the media is terrorizing Black people across America to the point that any police interaction is viewed with a certain level of tension, because all we see night in, night out are those 18 Black people killed. And we don't hear about the white people killed because it doesn't fit the narrative. This is part of the racism that I see in these institutions, is that they have an agenda to keep a certain group of people scared to come out of their home, because LeBron James says that every day in America, Black men are hunted by white cops and that it's open season.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up Colin Kaepernick earlier. Colin Kaepernick, I tried to tell people, stop letting Trump take the narrative of what Colin Kaepernick is doing. And can we just talk about what Cap is protesting? Because first of all, Cap went to a former Army vet player,
Right, special forces,
teammate, and said, how can I respectfully protest?
Right, because the
That's
guy
why he
was a
started
special
taking a
forces
knee.
guy. The special forces guy who didn't like the way of him sitting on the bench. And so they actually did what you and I are doing. They had a conversation, okay? Because this is a white special forces guy. They had a conversation and he said, kneel. Instead of taking the seat on the bench, kneel.
Yeah, he said,
the other problem with that is
when we have a fallen soldier,
right.
We all take a knee. Yeah.
Yes, been there, done that.
But I wanted to make the argument that Colin Kaepernick's exact quote was this: every day in America, Black men are hunted in the street, and these white cops get nothing else. There's no justice that gets to them. They just get a desk job. And so my thing was, hey, forget Trump and all of his buffoonery. Let's keep the topic at hand. That just empirically isn't true. It isn't true like hands up, don't shoot wasn't true. It isn't true like if Trayvon Martin was my son, he'd look like, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. It's like Michelle Obama saying that living in Martha's Vineyard, she's afraid for Malia and Sasha to be pulled over.
With the Secret Service around?
That's just not true. But Black people hear that night in, night out, and they live typically, not all Black people, obviously, but they live in high crime areas where guess what police do? Police are not going to go on the other side of the tracks where there's 2 murders a year when they're trying to prevent and go into places where there's 50 murders a year.
Right. But here's the part of the point that I think that you're missing. And that is that one, you have these high crime. I'm not saying that the neighborhoods don't have high crime, but were you talking? Oh, okay. Thought that you were muted out. But they have high crime areas, but there are police officers back in, like you talked about, in the 60s, the 70s, the 50s. The police officers lived in the neighborhood. These police officers don't live in the neighborhood. Okay, they come from outside of the neighborhood with their pristine yards and their boats and all this other stuff, and then they come here to chaos. Okay, and they come in to chaos with, we got big boots on, we're gonna stomp it out. Well, that's not always the best way to handle things. You can't run around stop and frisking people. You can't pull people over just because they're driving a nice car. And where did you get this car? And who are you? Why you can't? And so those are the things that Black folks deal with on a regular basis compared to white people. Okay.
100%,
now, if a white person was in one of these bad areas, it might be, what are you, they might get pulled over. What are you doing here? Especially if it's a high drug area or something like that, or you might want to get out of this area. You're in the wrong part of town. But when you see things like, I don't know if you recall, there was a Stanford swimmer, I think he was, who raped this girl and got 6 months in jail. You're not going to have some Black man raping some female and getting 6 months in jail. And the judges and the lawyers talking about, well, he's a really good kid. And that, first of all, if you're in Stanford and you're not a freshman, you're probably not a kid. You're probably a young adult. Okay, so you're not 12. Okay, you're 20, 22, whatever. You know the difference between rape and consensual. Okay, or as Kwame says, the R word. And
yeah, don't get the video taken down.
Right, don't get the video taken down. You know the difference between, those things. So by going and saying, oh, he's a good guy, I don't care that he's got good grades. I don't care that he got a perfect score on his SAT. His actions dictate that he belongs in jail for this period of time.
Yeah, okay. But Kevin, I don't think on the whole, like, I understand your anecdotal example, but like on the whole, I think you and I both pretty much feel like in 2021, should you and I do something completely out of character and get into a legitimate run-in with the law, I don't think you nor I believe that either one of us has an advantage per se. And as a minister, and you being a businessman, you may have some resources, and it's back to that green. You may have some resources to get a better attorney than I may, simply as a poor, minister, that give you an advantage over me. And like I think we live in a system where, in general, we're always going to be able to point out to those outliers where injustice is taking place. But when we talk about systemic racism or institutional racism, we're talking about stuff in mass. And what I'm trying to say is that where there is systemic racism, racism today isn't clans, isn't robes, isn't burning crosses on lawns. It is in the places that uphold affirmative action. It is in the places that limit choice. It is in the places where Black people are infantilized to a position that to look at you is to say, I don't think you're capable, Kevin, of living as a free, responsible individual, able to do as much as you want to do for yourself and your family and your community because you're Black. That's the racism that I see happening today. But that's the same racism, those same people, those same racists are the ones who empower just enough Black people to keep the rest of the Black people down, which is always
that's
been.
That's how Obama got into office, in my opinion.
I agree.
Okay, the country was in an uproar that those last couple of years of Bush's administration. The economy was tanking, all that, and the comedian Cat Williams.
Yeah.
Okay, he has this part where he talks about when Obama got elected. He said Black people were on the sidelines, ready to jump in like double dutch. Okay, whatever you want us to do, he was like, we wanted a superhero, but we never checked to see if he owned a cape. Okay, and if you look, and this is just once again my opinion, yes, you were a Black president. I give you that. You were a two-term Black president. I will give you that. But in terms of things to help Black folks progress and move some of those barriers out of their way, I don't think you did that.
Do you think that between the 10-year funding for HBCUs, the criminal justice reform, the musicians copyright act that was passed, the unemployment rate pre-COVID, lowest in recorded history in the Black community under President Trump, do you think Trump did more for the Black community in 4 years than Obama did in 8?
No, I think he did some things, but I think that the other things that he did set Black folks back further.
So I just named 4 things that Trump did that nobody disagrees with were good things for the Black community. Can you name 2 things that Obama did that were good for the Black community?
Well, that depends on who you are. And what I mean by that is, okay, because I was gonna say, if you're the alphabet people.
To you.
Okay, if you're the alphabet people, as Dave Chappelle refers to them, LGBTQ, IA, XYZ, then you, and I'm not trying to make fun of anybody or anything.
No, I'm with you.
There's too many letters for me to keep up with. Every day there's a new line. So I don't know, which line are you in? I don't know. But in terms of what he did for Black folks, got more of them elected. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. Like Jason Riley, and I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not a fan.
So Jason Riley wrote a book. He's a Wall Street Journal opinion writer. He's also a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He wrote a book how Black power, meaning Black elected officials, has not necessarily equated to Black progress in the overall community with all the disparities.
Right. It's like a quote I heard yesterday that said the pain from the whip is the same. It doesn't make a difference whether it comes from a Black hand or a white hand.
100%, right? So If in one election cycle,
Mhm.
if in one election, think about this, if in one election cycle, 75% of the black vote went for the Republican, you would show Republicans that the black vote can be courted and won.
Mhm.
So it's worth the effort to try and get the black vote.
Or is it more worth the effort to redistrict?
Well, redistricting might be a little bit more difficult because you have to take state houses, you have to have the census data to work out correctly. So it's not as simple to redistrict, as we might make it out to be, right?
Yeah.
But in the same sense, it would also send a message to the Democrat Party that you need to stop taking us for granted. Because the Democrat Party cannot win any election
without black votes.
without 90+% of black people voting for them.
Mhm.
So they know that they're going to get the black vote. So they don't care about what the community needs.
So we'll stick a black face out there. We'll
We're
stick
gonna-
a black
we're-
that whether they're gonna do good for you or not, because
we're going to say racism, 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 white people, police brutality. We're going to throw a couple of key buzzwords out there that make you go, yeah, I can't pull the lever for a Republican.
but the
And then
Republicans
Kevin-
do the same thing.
No, because the Republicans in large, and Trump was the first to do this. Do you realize that Trump got more in his reelection campaign? More black women, more black men, more Latino women, more Latino men, and more white women voted for Trump the second time than the first time.
Okay.
He lost votes with white men.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute. I thought Trump was the white guy's candidate. This guy's picking up minority votes and the marginalized vote doing this Trump thing. It like blows the narrative out the water.